From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I am Estefania Bravo, and this is From the South. We began in the Dominican Republic, where China has opened its first embassy. China's most senior envoy, Wang Yi, along with the Dominican Republic's Foreign Minister, Miguel Vargas, presided over the opening in Santo Domingo. This comes almost 5 months after the two nations established diplomatic relations following a severing of ties with Taiwan. Along with the Dominican Republic, Panama and El Salvador have also stopped recognizing Taiwan in the past 2 years.
The Dominican Republic recognized the important role China plays in current global affairs, and it is essential for us to have China's support and experience during our involvement in international and multilateral organizations, as well as the UN Security Council.
As the two fastest growing countries in East Asia and Latin America and the Caribbean, respectively, we trust that the strengthening of Sino-Dominican cooperation will not only bring greater well-being to the Dominican people, but also contribute to the development of this country and inject renewed dynamism in cooperation between China and Latin America and the Caribbean as a whole.
Earlier, the Chinese foreign minister met the Dominican president, Danilo Medina, to deepen diplomatic ties. The Dominican Republic's exports to China exceed $2 billion, making it the second largest business partner after the U.S. Our correspondent in Santo Domingo, Daisy Toussaint, has more.
The
foreign minister of the People's Republic of China, Wang Yi, along with his Dominican counterpart Miguel Vargas, together opened the first Chinese embassy in the Dominican Republic. The former Dominican presidents, Hipólito Mejía and Leonel Fernández, also attended the ceremony. In the morning, Foreign Minister Wang visited the presidential palace to meet President Danilo Medina. The two foreign ministers signed an MOU on setting up a mechanism for political consultations. Wang said that the Dominican Republic is China's main economic partner in the Caribbean, and that all cooperation between the two countries will be conducted on the basis of equality and mutual benefit. The two sides discussed various shared interests, including details of President Medina's upcoming visit to China at the end of October, and the possible agreements that he might sign then. They also talked about the UN Security Council and various regional bodies.
We thank Daisy for that report. The Prime Minister of Barbados would like every Barbadian child to speak some Mandarin by 2030. Mia Mottley said her vision as she attended the 67th anniversary of the founding of the People's Republic of China cocktail party. Her plan is to have the language taught in primary and secondary school, as it's becoming increasingly necessary to have some level of competence in it. Motley will be working closely with the Chinese government on how to roll out her plans. The Barbadian-born pop singer Rihanna Fenty has been named Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Barbados. It is an official appointment, which means that Rihanna is empowered to represent Barbados internationally on matters of education, tourism, and investment. Prime Minister Motley hailed the singer for the deep love she has for Barbados. The Ministry of Social Development in Grenada will provide a safe house to accommodate victims of abuse. Government says they're looking to purchase the building in the capital, St. George, later this year after the budget is passed. The minister says they're looking for trained staff to work in the house. As of now, the home will be solely for girls. The initiative goes in tandem with the Special Victims Unit established earlier this week.
We will be having a special home for girls. It's a place where you have house mothers, you interact with social workers and counselors. We have seen that there are many abuse cases, and when an issue arises for child protection to deal with the issue, because there's no way to put them, sometimes you put them in the next family and they get abused again. So we have looked at that, and in our budget coming in November, we will look to purchase a building.
Consensual sex between two men is now legal in Trinidad and Tobago. in an update to April's ruling that the laws criminalizing anal sex were unconstitutional. A judge has introduced the concept of consent to the law. Where consent is present, no law has been broken. Kenyan High Court has temporarily lifted a ban on a film portraying a lesbian love relationship, making it eligible for the Oscars. Titled Rafiki, which means friends in Swahili, the film was banned by the government because they believed it promoted homosexuality and is against the law. The movie can now compete for the Best Foreign Language Film at the Academy Awards. Earlier this year, the film was the first Kenyan movie ever to be premiered at the Cannes Film Festival. Homosexuality is illegal in the country. More Venezuelan migrants are signing up for the government's Return to the Homeland plan. This Friday, a group of Venezuelans gathered outside their embassy in Ecuador before flying back to Caracas. More than 3,000 Venezuelans have already returned home under the government initiative, and many more are applying to go back home. Venezuelan migrants in several Latin American countries say they have suffered from xenophobia and exploitation. On Thursday, over 100 Venezuelan migrants started their own journey back from Colombia.
Esmeralda Rios and her family signed up to the Return to the Homeland plan after suffering discrimination and hunger in Colombia.
I
would give anything to have never left Venezuela. The life of an immigrant is not easy at all. We are far from home, from our family. I trust in God and that our country's situation will improve.
Her greatest wish is to reunite with her children.
I'm beyond elated to return home and hug my kids, my mom. I miss them so much.
Just like Esmeralda, 140 migrants joined the trip from Bogotá and Bucaramanga. They all have familiar stories of being mistreated and exploited.
Their treatment of us was not kind. We didn't expect to be treated as royalty, but we at least expected to be treated with respect. I worked caring for a 96-year-old woman and her 2 children, and the best I could expect from them was to constantly be yelled at.
Entire families want to go home after being degraded.
My sister got very sick. I never imagined we would live through what we did. We had to sleep under a bridge. Our situation was horrible.
Their excitement grew stronger as night drew closer, knowing that the return was imminent.
President Nicolas Maduro met with ministers on Thursday to evaluate Venezuela's economic recovery plan. In a televised address, President Maduro called the advances made positive and meeting expectations. It's been a month since the plan was launched. Maduro said the new figures will safeguard the national currency and citizens' purchasing power. Our correspondent in Caracas has been out to see how people are dealing with the changes to the currency.
Here in the Venezuelan capital, people seem pleased with the first month of the new currency, the sovereign bolivar. For this analyst, you can feel the difference in the streets.
I think there's more stability and more calm. The fact is that a month and a half or 2 months ago, with the old currency and the old wages, you could buy very little in the street. Now we can see in Sabana Grande and other parts of Caracas, there are more people out in the street. They are buying more, and the whole exchange of goods and services is more dynamic.
People point to the greater supply of cash and the increase in purchasing power.
Before it was chaos. They give you 10,000 bolivars maximum. We suffer from the lack of cash. You couldn't buy a bus fare. But now at least things are moving again.
Shops have adapted to the new money without difficulty.
The difference is we are going back to work like we did years ago. It's easier to deal with the money instead of talking about millions of bolivars. I think it's a lot easier.
The head of the China National Petroleum Company has been in Venezuela to sign agreements. China has backed the new economic measures.
People
are well informed about the economic recovery program, and they have a very positive opinion about it. We signed 28 agreements in China to increase oil production, which Venezuela needs so badly.
The agreements signed with the People's Republic of China included finance to double Venezuela's oil production by August next year, support for basic industries and new mining projects, improvements in the distribution of medicines, and the launching of a new telecom satellite, the Guaycaipura. The aim is to strengthen the economy and overcome the impact of the economic war that Venezuela has suffered for the last 5 years.
The Venezuelan and Turkish foreign ministers have been discussing closer relations in Caracas. The Turkish minister Mevlut Cavusoglu met Jorge Arreaza to prepare a series of political and cultural agreements. They include easing visa requirements between the two countries and cooperation in the training of diplomats. Turkey has already signed a number of economic development agreements with Venezuela. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says the Trump administration is preparing a series of actions in the coming days to increase pressure on the Venezuelan government. Pompeo made the statement in an interview with Fox News on Friday. Venezuela has not yet commented on Pompeo's remarks, but it has always said that sanctions only hurt the Venezuelan people.
The United States anticipates processing up to 310.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Severe storms have caused extensive damage in the Mexican state of Sinaloa. Videos uploaded to social media showed stranded cars and rivers flowing through the streets of the city of Culiacan in northwestern Mexico. 3 people have died and 3 more are reported missing. According to local media, a number of people were taken to shelters as more storms are expected. Human rights activists have criticized the Mexican government for leaving them without protection among rising threats and violence.
Jorge Andrade's life has been threatened many times because of his work with undocumented migrants. Since 2014, he has approached the program for protecting human rights defenders and journalists at the government secretariat. But according to him, the program isn't sufficient to face the violence in the country.
The mechanism is only useful to protect us, the beneficiaries, but it doesn't do anything else. People who threaten or attack journalists or advocates are not arrested.
After 3 attacks, Julio Gomez signed up to the program. However, now the program doesn't have any funds, and its use is limited to advocates and journalists who have to leave their homes due to attacks or threats. The Enrique Peña administration's decision to cut their funds can have serious consequences for displaced journalists.
If we are sent home, it will mean death for me and my colleagues. Going back home is a suicide.
President Peña Nieto has pledged to support the program, which supports 727 human rights activists and journalists.
It looks like the state's policy is to hurt the cause of human rights. It's not only a scornful policy, but a contemptuous one. We have grades all over the country.
There has been a 60% reduction in the program's budget as compared to the $2.5 billion spent in 6 years on state advertising and presidential publicity.
This Peña Nieto's obscene expenditure is for him to show us, Mexican, a result that only exists in his imagination, or in something similar to what his administration was.
During the last 5 years, Mexico has been declared one of the most dangerous countries to work in as a journalist. 121 journalists were killed since 2000, according to organizations like Artículo 19. Also, 106 murders of social leaders have been documented.
Victims of sexual abuse in Chile have demanded the expulsion of 6 priests from the Marist congregation. The victims accuse the priests of abusing them in their childhood when they were students in schools belonging to the group. They pretended to give a letter to the Maristas authorities, but they did not attend to the date. The Marista scandal exploded in 2017 when a priest admitted his abuse. It is now being investigated. Chilean territory will not be part of any negotiations with Bolivia, the Chilean Foreign Minister Roberto Amparo has said. In 10 days, the International Court of Justice will rule on Bolivia's demand to have access to the Pacific Ocean through Chile. After decades without a solution, President Evo Morales took Bolivia's demand to the ICJ in The Hague. Bolivia lost its coast in the Pacific War of the 19th century.
Tenemos un diagnóstico allí compartido.
We agreed on a decision with all of Chile's former foreign ministers. Our sovereign territory is protected and won't be part of any negotiation.
The White House has announced Chilean President Sebastián Piñera will be in Washington, D.C. for an official visit next week. The White House says the leaders will discuss pro-growth policies, combating crime, partnerships in energy and cybersecurity, and the situation in Venezuela. Brazilian women are mobilizing for an online and offline combat against the presidential candidate Jair Bolsonaro with the hashtag #NotHim. Protests have been planned in cities around the world to demonstrate anger against his rise in the polls for the upcoming election on the 7th of October. Demonstrators are angry at his offensive statements against women, Black people, and the LGBTI community. Prominent Brazilian actresses, journalists, and TV presenters are among the list of women who are campaigning against the right-wing candidate. Jair Bolsonaro is still in hospital after being stabbed while campaigning. He says he hopes to be discharged by the end of the month.
Hello friends, September 21st, Friday. Spring is close. I have never felt so good in life. Thanks to you all. By the end of the month, if God is willing, I will live and we will be together October 7 for a new chapter in our Brazil's life. Together until victory. Thank you.
Bolsonaro wasn't present for Thursday's televised debate between the candidates for Brazil's presidential election. The fight against corruption took center stage in the debate. Candidates also broached other issues, including labor reform and the need to change the political system. Workers' Party candidate Fernando Haddad pledged to revoke the labor law, which compromises working class rights. Haddad also rejected the freezing of public investment.
The second ethical aspect in politics is to favor the poorest. After health services home from those who do not have homes, the social programs of government should be directed for all, but specifically for those who need them the most. That is why it is important to consider the poorest and fight corruption.
Talks have been continuing in Costa Rica between the government and union leaders on the economic reform bill. Unions agreed to meet politicians after stalling the progress of the bill in Congress. The country's Episcopal Conference intervened, forcing the government to reconsider. Workers demand the economic reform to be scrapped as they would raise prices and lower taxes for the rich. There has been a national strike that is now in its second week, which may come to an end depending on these discussions. Our correspondent in San Jose, Fernando Francia, has more.
On Thursday, labor unions and the government met for 12 hours. The meeting was mediated by the Episcopal Conference. The two sides have not reached an agreement yet, although they have made their positions clear for their next meeting on Friday. These are still preliminary talks with the purpose of discussing the government's proposed economic reform. Labor unions are asking for a repeal of the current plan and that another one be drafted with their input. For their part, the government does not want to totally discard their current plan. This is the second week of a national strike, and it's likely to enter a third week if discussions are not resolved over the weekend.
We'll be back very soon. Stay with us. Welcome back. Police forces have clamped down on an anti-government demonstration in the capital of Mali. The police used tear gas to disperse the protesters opposing the recently elected president, Ibrahim Boubacar Keïta, on the eve of Independence Day. Various social movements said they planned to gather overnight at the labor exchange. Keïta won with a landslide at the beginning of September, despite increasing violence in the country. Voters have cast their ballots in parliamentary elections in Eswatini. Formerly known as Swaziland, citizens of the kingdom were voting for new members of the parliament at more than 300 polling stations. Results are expected to come in over the weekend. Whatever the outcome, King Mswati III rules over the parliament, the government, judiciary, civil services, and security forces. He will also appoint a new prime minister within the next month. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas has said he is ready to hold talks with Israel. Abbas was speaking in Paris after meeting the French President Emmanuel Macron. They discussed funding for the Palestinian Refugee Agency after the United States cut its funding of over $200 million. Abbas clarified that he would talk to Israel at any time. The last peace talks collapsed in 2014 over Jewish settlements and other issues.
We have stated our stances related to the negotiations that we have not rejected, not once. Usually, the Israelis say the Palestinians refuse the talks. I challenge them to show us, once we were invited to confidential or public talks in any country, and to show if we rejected. The rejection was always from Netanyahu. Now we say that we're ready for any confidential or public talks. The mediator will be the international quartet plus other countries. We welcome any European or Arab countries.
The newly elected president of the Congress of South African Trade Unions, Singisi, has called on the government to immediately downgrade diplomatic relations with Israel. She said it was a show of support to the Palestinian people and a means to pressure Israel to end its occupation of Palestine.
We call on the South African government to implement the Nasrec resolution on the immediate and unconditional downgrade of the embassy in Tel Aviv. It is now more than 6 months since the withdrawal of our ambassador. We therefore call for the decisiveness on the part of the ANC government in this regard. Similarly, we believe that our government can do more to push back against the corrupt advances that Israel and Morocco are making within the African Union.
And now for some other news from around the world.
Hundreds of people have protested against rising rents in Berlin. The demonstration was timed to coincide with the housing summit held by the Interior Minister. With prices rising by over 20% in 2017, the German capital has the highest average rent increases in the world. As a result, homelessness also rose by almost 50% between 2015 and 2016.
I don't see the so-called rental caps a real cap. Rather, it means that every 3 years, the basic rent can be increased by 15%. That means that in 15 years, it will be more than double. I don't receive double my pension in order to balance that out. That means in 10 years, I will no longer be able to live in this apartment. That's drastic for me, because I no longer have the strength to move somewhere else.
The police have recovered at least 136 bodies from the water so far after a ferry sank on Lake Victoria in Tanzania. The authorities managed to rescue 37 people. The boat sank just a few meters from the dock. The ferry was reportedly carrying more than 300 people, but accurate numbers are hard to get because the crew were drowned and the passenger records were lost. Over the last week, a number of international donors have suspended aid to Zambia over corruption allegations. They include Britain, Finland, and Sweden. About $4 million were allegedly embezzled from a social benefits program. The development minister in charge of the scheme was fired over the case.
It is Jose in Trinidad and Tobago. In St. James, Trinidad, where people dance the moon to the sounds of tasa drums. They march alongside the tajas, which are multicolored model mosques. The tradition comes from the Muharram observances from Shia Muslims. And with that story, we've come to the end of this news brief. These and other stories, as always, find them on our website at telesurtv.net/English. And also join us on social media, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. For Televisor English, I am Estefania Bravo. Thank you for watching.